Hello, and welcome back to today's American Flyer Trains for video part 2 of the rebuild of 322 Hudson from American Flyer Trains. Stay tuned. As is my usual practice in these rebuilds, is I usually start back to front, bottom to top. And that way when I get through, or when I'm on the last phase, once I get that done, I'm complete, and I can give the full assembly a test. So we'll start with the tender. And we're going to start bottom up, especially the six-wheel trucks, which I really like. This is the only tender I have that has a six-wheel truck. You probably have several. And I wish that I could match this with something. This is my 320 Hudson that I rebuilt. You probably heard me speak about it a lot. This is one that I resurrected out of a junk box. This is the one where the handrails and steam piping were blackened, but they were coated in rust, and I had no choice but to polish them. I had to match it to a sheet metal tender because in the junk box the tender was totally missing from this piece. So I had to kind of invent one and then labeled it like the Hudson would have been labeled, with the larger tender. It doesn't have the six-wheel trucks, but I did paint these trucks to match the tender, and even painted the journal boxes so that it may look a little bit more like a Hudson. But the point is I'd like to someday take that 322 and match it up to this. Now it would require a conversion over to knuckle couplers, or maybe a transition car that would go from link to knuckle. But you'll recall that I mentioned I really like the six-wheel trucks on the die-cast body of the tender that goes with 322. Well, I would like it to pull this depressed center searchlight car with generator, because it has a pair of six-wheel trucks. This depressed center cable reel car, which has a die-cast body and six-wheel trucks, which is then followed by, in this consist in my work train, a 644 crane car that has simulated six-wheel trucks, but it still has the die-cast frame. But I reinserted the center axle and wheels. A.C. Gilbert already had a position for them. He just removed them during production to save money, but I reinserted them. So we're talking about three cars with six wheels, or 12 total wheels and axles. So we're talking about 36, and add that to be a total of 48 that would be in four cars in a consist, including the tender. Can you imagine the clickety-clack? And of course, if you've seen on my videos, that's followed by this, what they sometimes call work caboose or crane tender, that does not have six-wheel trucks, but it does have the centered iron side frames, and it has a die-cast chassis. Okay, starting with the bottom of the six-wheel truck tender for 322, you'll notice that two of the axles are dummy axles here and here. I didn't insert these. This is the way it came from the factory. What I mentioned on the crane car is that they were missing on the crane car, and inside the description, A.C. Gilbert changed these to simulated six-wheel trucks. I made them actual six-wheel trucks on the 644 by inserting that extra axle. Of course, the outer axles on each truck are where the pickup wheels are located. And then, of course, the transfer of power from the pickup wheel to the axle is through these wipe or swipe leaf springs. Now, I've mentioned I've spent quite a bit of time in the initial disassembly and rebuild of this and removing these axles. I won't do it on this rebuild. I will not do it and demonstrate it in this video, but I removed them using the technique that I had demonstrated in an earlier video, where I used snap ring pliers to apply the pressure to the frame, not the side of the frame, through the actual substructure of the truck itself, to push these out and remove them all. And I spent a pretty good amount of time polishing these springs to make sure they would provide the best performance possible, and I retension them by pulling them out to make sure there's plenty of tension on that spring. And then a light lubrication of CRC 226 at the friction point. To test them, I just apply pressure with my thumb to make sure the spring pops the axle back into the downward position. That assures me that the pressure is adequate. Later I'll mention this switch mechanism right here. When I mention switch mechanism, it's going to be, that's it right there. You can slide it to the the rear position or to the forward position. It's just a sliding switch. However, it's not the one that maybe you're used to seeing on the bottom of a tender or on the top of a boiler that can move or rotate the drum in a reverse unit. Here's the tow bar. Now, A.C. Gilbert actually refers to this as a coupler. I usually refer to them as a tow bar. And then, of course, there is the link coupler. Now, this one does match the year of the train. This is a thick shank, weightless link coupler. I don't know how they would have ever pulled this train with the thin shank coupler. I don't still see how it would be strong enough to do it or use it on this train, which could pull quite a consist. And then, of course, it has a black, heavy sheet metal chassis. This chassis is a little bit heavier. I don't think it's die cast, but I think it's a little heavier than just your standard sheet metal chassis. We mentioned the chassis, but that is not what this is referred to right here. A.C. Gilbert refers to this as the base that supports the switch and provides the support structure for the smoke and choo-choo components. It is affixed to the chassis through two screws that are located side by side right here. Now, they're kind of awkward to get to because you've got to release those in order to eventually release the smoke unit, which allows you to pull this out. However, I've never tried it, but there's a possibility you could slide this cylinder up out of the slot if you release the pin. But I didn't try that, meaning that you could undo that nut right there and then take the clip off that holds the cylinder to the smoke unit and maybe take that up, straight up, and then you could be more conveniently to get to those two screws. That may be what it would take. So this train has two motors, the locomotive power and then the smoke and choo-choo. The latter powers both the smoke and the choo-choo. This motor is just a miniature of what you're probably used to as a locomotive power. It has the standard, well, not standard, but it has the standard nomenclature and relationship of the brush bracket assembly, which is right there, plastic. And then it has two small slotted brushes right there and right there that are held in by these single strand clip type wires, coiled wires that hold those into position. Now, if you've ever taken apart one of the later motors, you may notice that the brushes have what are called a shoulder top, meaning that they're held in with a spring, which is then held in by a clip. These are held in by this, and they're exposed. You'll notice the brush is actually exposed, and there's this very small slot cut in the brush that the spring fits into. To release them, simply take the end of the spring, pull it out, drop it down a little bit, and then the brush, you can probably remove it with your fingers, or you can shake it and it drops out. And of course, they're held in by those single spring wires. The field is right here. Again, it's just miniature compared to what you're used to. One of the things that you're probably already used to is that these fields are connected usually by a single strand of wire. So you don't want to overhandle these, and be very gentle with them to make sure you don't sever these wires that go from the field up to the brush bracket assembly or elsewhere on the train. One good thing about these, just like on the mid-1950s steam locomotives, is that this field does not have to be centered. Its centering is done automatically for you simply by seating everything back into its little chassis or hold position. Let's turn it around and look at the armature. From this view, you can see the armature that I'm going to spin a little bit. It's right here. And it can easily spin. The armature is located here. There's a commutator, really, really tiny commutator that faces the two brushes. There's one of the spring tips right there that holds the brushes in. A bushing right here that extends on out through the worm gear, which meshes with the main drive gear, which of course provides the mechanism for the piston and the smoke and choo-choo. Now, This is just miniature from what you're used to working with, those standard steam locomotives. The only thing I'd remind everyone of, as I'd remind myself, is not to overhandle these and be very, very gentle not to break or that bond between the field and the brush bracket assembly right here, the plastic piece right here, because it is a single strand of wire. Now, a good thing is, once again, is you don't have to align the field. You don't have to center it because there's only one place it can go, into the slots that are provided as part of this base. So there's the base again, and it has this vertical piece right here that is what holds the motor on, and of course you can't go wrong. It's got 2 screws on the back that hold the whole structure together, and once these 2 screws are released, then you can start taking this apart. It just pulls out, but then again, that's where you need to protect these solder points and single strand of wires that go right there. So that is really the nomenclature and pieces on this tender, and there is the upper part of the switch that I was mentioning, right there. And all it does is turn the smoke and choo-choo unit on and off. It's now in the off position. It has separated the connection point's right there. Pushing it back in the other position, forward or toward the front of the train, reconnects it. So if this is kind of annoying to you to have the smoke and choo-choo running constantly, even in idle, you can shut it off if you want to, and just use the power of the locomotive. Okay, we're continuing on, and this is where the changes really begin on a smoke and tender locomotive, which includes this one, in which the nomenclature and the anatomy kind of take on a different look and feel. If you have one of these and it still has the smoke, still has the billows, this is where you expect to find it right here, and of course you'll see it's not there. This is part of the smoke and tender conversion kit. When I got this train, the billows unit, which fits right here, was completely missing. Not the frame, nothing was available. I think the lever was also missing right here. The smoke unit was in the box. That's it. And it was available, but it was in pretty sad shape, and I just didn't want to rebuild it. Now, this is when a colleague of mine stepped in and said, I highly recommend that you try out this smoke and tender conversion kit from Portline Hobbies to save the effort of trying to rebuild that billows. And since I wasn't going to restore the train, I was simply going to rebuild it, I thought that met my needs perfectly. There are 5 components, 5 pieces that come with the smoke and tender conversion kit. One is the clip, which holds a knob on that fits down in a slot on the smoke unit, and the clip simply holds the knob in place that holds the cylinder in place. Now, the cylinder is not rigid. It's just a knob that slides down into a slot straight down, and then you put the clip on there just to hold it in. It includes the cylinder, of course, the clip, the cylinder, the piston, which is inside here. It's exactly the same piston that's used in other smoke and choo-choo units. The pin that holds the piston to the lever, and then the lever itself. I'm pretty sure that mine had that nut, but if it didn't, I actually have quite a few of those extra in my parts. Now, other Portline Hobby conversion kits that I've used and been pleased with and had good results are the link to knuckle coupler conversion kit, the speaker capacitor resistor conversion replacement kit for diesel or onboard roar amplification and horn. So that's 3 conversion kits from them that I have found have worked very satisfactorily, including this one. Rather than rebuild this smoke unit, I chose to purchase from Portline's a rebuilt smoke unit. Now, one of the things you have to make sure of if you buy one of those, a rebuilt smoke unit, is that if it is intended for this conversion kit, it must have a notch in place of a hole that is normally on the smoke unit. This one was ideal for and matched up to the smoke unit when it had the bellows. But you have to cut out this area that's in black right here, and I just drew it in with black ink so that you could see where it is. That slot has to be cut out. Well, Portline sells these smoke units in which the slot is already cut. If it's not cut, I don't think this would be really a tough task. I think a high-speed rotary tool could cut it out and just create that slot. There's no structure. It's just an empty space on the other side where that goes. But that's a really, really important component of this, is to make sure that your smoke box has that slot. Already on the train and in the box was the fuel filler tube and its filler cap screw, which I have lying around somewhere. There it is. It was already in the junk box, which had this train as part of the estate sale. So these were already present, and I simply removed them from the old smoke unit. The nut was in the box. The filler cap was in the box. I can get it back on top. A little clumsy. Can't seem to get it to start threading. And there we go. And it goes there, of course, just to put a cap on that on top of the tender. So I had this particular tube and I simply removed it, or it may have been loose in the box, but nonetheless I had it, so I put it back where it should go. It is not included on the smoke unit that I bought from Portline Hobby. And then, of course, the exit tube I already had because I think it was attached to the smoke box. And it was a little tougher to pull out than I thought. It does go in with the threads, but it was a little difficult to remove. But this is what connects the hose or tube that extends the full length of the boiler to connect to the 90-degree smoke stack tube. So if you do buy one of these and it does appear to be in poor condition or disassembled, make sure you got that brass tube inside the boiler, which is where the other end of the rubber tube extends. Speaking of rubber tubes, let's take a look at those. Now I have two. I have one that I purchased from Portline, which is my preferred one. This one is very pliable, very flexible, easy to work with because I had used it once before. I simply connect it here, extend it through the tender first, and then connect it to the brass 90-degree tube there. And then, of course, you go about putting in the motor. And you've got to make sure that you're not totally pinching this tube. But it worked. It was pretty easy to do. I was kind of surprised. Now, this one I had to cut the tips off because they had become a little dry rotted. Even though I put it in maybe 2 to 3 years ago. But it's still very pliable, very flexible, very strong. So I'm going to try to use this one again. If it doesn't work, I acquired this one. It's rather inexpensive. It does have a shiny coat to it. It is not quite as flexible, and I think it may be just a little bit more difficult, although I've heard from others that they use this with a lot of success. The one thing I do like about it, it's a little longer than that flexible one I have. I'm going to have to cut it down to size, which is a good thing, and then it fits over those brass fittings very easily. I've already tested that. So I'm going to try this flexible one that I bought from Portline a couple of years ago. If that doesn't work, if it's not quite long enough because I had to snip the ends, I'm going to go back. I'm going to try this one. I see also maybe another issue with the fact that this one's not quite as flexible, and I'm going to have to squeeze the chassis in there with the motor on top of it, and I may have to push down on that thing just a little bit. Well, let's wrap up this video with checking out the railhead performance on the smoke and choo-choo tender, the smoke and tender. One thing that I failed to mention is the wiring that I had to install, and that's the yellow wiring. With only the bellows missing, all the other core wiring was in place that goes to and from the field up to a certain point, and then also to the brushes. All I had to do is extend this one field wire up with this yellow wire up to the top of the smoke unit. And of course, I connected it with a physical connection there, and then solder, and then put shrink wrap around it. Now we'll take a look at the other side. To that same connection point on the smoke unit that I just mentioned right here, I had to extend another wire that went from there down to the truck. Now, the technique I used was to drop it straight down and then go up under the platform and then loop back around and then solder it to the contact point. That gave me a lot of play so that the truck could spin freely and wouldn't put any pressure on the wire. The only other wire I had to extend was from the other side of the smoke unit down to the switch. All other wiring was intact, so it's only 3 wires that had to be installed. And that's about the lowest idle that I can get on this one. So this is what it would look and sound like if you had it on the layout with the lowest power, although I seem to be getting this one a little bit lower. So your locomotive might be sitting there. And that, of course, is so slow you can't even hear the choo-choo. Of course, it operates only in one direction. This one ought to have enough fluid in it to produce a little smoke. Oh yeah. Put it up to about 90% power. Kind of different sound to the choo-choo, I think you'll agree. And you'll probably notice one thing right away is the train is probably not going to be moving as fast as the choo-choo sounds because they're not synchronized with 2 motors.